Sergey Lavrov, welcome to Hard Talk. The world was deeply alarmed last week by the prospect of a direct military confrontation between the United States and Russia. How close do you believe we came to that?
Well, I don't think that was very close. I believe it was a situation created by very reckless behavior of our Western colleagues who accused the Syrian government and thus as allies of the Syrian government in applying chemical weapons against civilians without waiting for OPCW to inspect the place. Actually, at the moment when OPCW was physically ready to move from Lebanon to Syria, they executed these strikes. As the representatives of our military explained, the deconflicting channel has been engaged all the time.
So to be clear about that, without using jargon, the US and allied forces gave you indications of how the strikes were to be carried out, and you gave them some indication that you would not retaliate?
I prefer not to get into the nitty-gritty of these military-to-military channels. There is a channel existing between the Russian and the United States military, both between the capitals and on the ground in Syria. And I believe the military discussed and continue to discuss this and other things very professionally. They understand each other, and they understand maybe better than anyone else the danger of this kind of adventure.
But Mr. Lavrov, this crisis is not over, is it?
It depends on those who invented the crisis.
Well, it's quite clear from words used by your own diplomats. Your ambassador to the United States said there would be consequences for the strikes that we saw. Vladimir Putin called it an illegal act of aggression. So the world wants to know, what is Russia going to do now?
That's a statement of fact. And consequences, certainly there would be consequences. We lose basically the last remnants of trust to our Western friends, who prefer to operate on the basis of very weird logic. Proof is in the punishment. They punish first, like they did in Salisbury. Then they wait for Scotland Yard to finalize the investigation. They punish first in Duma in Syria, and then they wait for the inspectors of OPCW to visit the place and to inspect. Proof by the punishment is what is being applied by the Troika of Western countries.
Well, I want to talk to you about the detail of the cases you've mentioned, both in Duma and the Skripal case as well. But before we get there, I just want to continue the idea of the diplomatic relationship today. Now, the US ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said US forces remain locked and loaded. When you hear that kind of language, how do you respond?
Well, I think that they have to put their own house together in Washington, because we understand that this kind of statements could be made either by the commander-in-chief or by the military. And as I said, the military of the United States and of the Russian Federation maintain the deconflicting channel on Syria, and this is some kind of confidential information.
You say there is no trust. You mean zero trust now between Russia and the United States?
We are losing the last remnants of trust, which is not yet zero.
Not yet zero. I just wonder, on the most basic level, you're the foreign minister of Russia. When you wake up in the morning and you read on Twitter the words of the United States President and Commander-in-Chief saying, in essence, get ready, Russia, our nice new smart missiles are coming. What do you make of that?
Well, I make of that the President of the United States writes his tweet.
And your response to those tweets is?
Well, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as you know. So we waited for this smart new, what else was there? Nice missiles to be used at the attack. And we calculated that 2/3 of them didn't reach the target because they were intercepted.
There's absolutely no evidence of that, is there?
Well, the military of the Russian Federation, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, presented its assessment, and it's available for the professional discussion.
We'll get back to the credibility of the information provided by all the sides in this crisis later. But for now, Continuing with the diplomatic thread, Theresa May, British Prime Minister, Emmanuel Macron, President of France, both made it very, very clear that the intervention we saw was all about degrading and deterring the Syrian government's chemical weapons threat. It was not about an intervention in the Syrian war, and it was certainly not about regime change in Damascus. Do you accept that?
So they said.
Do you accept it?
We don't accept this. What we accept, I mean, you have hard talk, you know, we want hard facts. And highly likely is really ridiculous. And the policies of our Western friends...
Sorry, when you say highly likely, you mean the assessment that chemical weapons were used in Duma by the Assad government forces?
No, I said highly likely as a new invention of the British diplomacy to describe why they punish people. Because these people are highly likely guilty. Like in Alice in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, when he described a trial, and when they discovered that the jury could be engaged, and the king said, let's ask the jury, and the queen shouted, no jury, sentence first, verdict afterwards. That's the logic of highly likely.
Well, that's what you say. Let's get into the detail of what happened in Duma, but let's do it by first asking a very basic question. Russia opposes the use of chemical weapons, and it believes people who use those weapons should be punished. Yes?
Is it a question?
Do you agree with that?
I thought you were much better informed about the Russian position to ask the obvious.
It's obvious. You agree, because you've signed the relevant treaties. You are part of the international commitment to ban and eliminate the use of chemical weapons.
Yes, more than that. We did eliminate our chemical weapons in 2017, which was verified by the OPCW, which was welcomed by the entire OPCW Executive Committee. And unfortunately, the United States is still to deliver on its own obligations, which they have been postponing and postponing again and again.
But if I have just stated the obvious, and it is quite clear what the Russian commitment is, then surely you must want the perpetrators of that chemical weapons attack in Duma, for which there is overwhelming evidence, to be punished.
Wait. You are jumping the facts again.
Well, I don't think I am.
There is no proof that on the 7th of April, chemical weapons were used in Duma.
But
Can you...
Emmanuel Macron and the French have made it quite plain. They have intercepts which show helicopter movements, Syrian government helicopter movements over Duma. They have pictures of gas canisters found at the site of the attack. They also have the record of the Syrian government over the last several years using chemical weapons. If you put all of that together, as far as the French, the Americans, the British are concerned...
I cannot be impolite to the heads of other states. And of course, I cannot be polite to the head of my state. But you quoted the leaders of France and UK and the United States. And frankly speaking, all the evidence which they quoted was based on the media reports and on social networks. The canisters, I saw this picture, a canister lying on a bed, and the bed is intact, and the window glass is not broken. Look, you need to be a bit more serious. Can you explain to me why strike the day before OPCW is going to move there and to verify the fact which they assert was a fact?
The American representative of the OPCW, the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, says there is a deep concern that Russia has tampered with the evidence sites in Duma. Can you guarantee Russia has not tampered with them?
Well, yes, I can guarantee. But before you know, it's like it's absolutely the same as was the logic of Theresa May on Salisbury. When we asked dozens of questions, when we requested common investigation, when we requested our presence at the sample staking ceremony, if you wish, she said, no, we're not going to answer any question until Russia answers all our questions. The only question which was addressed to Russia, tell us how you did it. Was it ordered by Putin, the poisoning of this poor couple, or this was the result of you losing your control over chemical arsenals? I believe, for any intelligent person, it's a situation which is absolutely obvious.
I'll get back to the Skripals.
Back to Duma.
Yes,
Back to Duma.
and listen, back to Duma and back to credibility. You have claimed that the event in Duma, first of all, didn't happen. Then the message seemed to change, and you said there was some sort of event, but it was stage managed and fabricated by what you called a Russophobic country.
The event did not take place. What did take place was the staged thing. It did not involve any chemical weapons.
And you believe Britain was behind the staging of a mock chemical weapons attack in Duma, yes?
It's up to the history, knows some experience during previous decades. What we do believe, and the special services, of course, can present information to the British colleagues.
Well, you say there's irrefutable proof that it was faked, it was staged. You claim the white helmet humanitarian first responders were involved. Where is this irrefutable proof?
Well, the irrefutable proof is in the visiting of the place. And
where's your irrefutable proof that the white helmets backed by the British government have faked the whole thing? It's about credibility. Where's your credibility?
What I did say was that the white helmets are known to work only on the territories controlled by the opposition, including Jabhat and Nusra. And the white helmets are known to be ringing the bell 1 year ago in Han Shihun, which was a fake from the beginning to the end. And the white helmets are known to be financed, among other countries, by the United Kingdom.
For a minute, so that doesn't represent irrefutable proof.
No, wait a second. Irrefutable proof of what?
You said you had irrefutable proof that a Russophobic country, by which you meant Britain, had worked with these white helmets
why did you say that I meant Britain? Don't put your words into my mouth. I did say a country which is trying to lead the Russophobic campaign. Please quote me correctly. Otherwise, it would be not very journalistic, I would say. So, speaking of irrefutable facts, the Duma event was agreed to be investigated by OPCW inspectors. They moved to Lebanon. They were told by the Syrian government that they would be immediately issued visas as they come to the border. 7 hours later, the Duma and the Syrian territory was struck. What is the reason for going that way 1 day before the inspectors were about to arrive there?
If the French, the British, and the American governments are right and you are wrong, and President Assad continues to use chemical weapons, just as he did in Ghouta, where he killed up to 1,000 people in 2013, just as he did in Khan Sheikhun last year, just as the US-led forces say he did in Duma. If they are right and you are wrong, will you agree that President Assad must be punished?
Look, you don't hear me. You don't listen to me even. What I said, that the aggressive action was taken less than 24 hours before the international inspectors, including, by the way, American citizens, as far as I understand, were to visit the place where the alleged chemical attack happened. The one last year event in Han Shihun happened on the 4th of April. Next morning, Rex Tillerson called me and said, why don't you tell the Syrian government that they must allow inspectors to the air base from which the plane allegedly carrying chemical bomb took off. And we told them next morning that the permission was granted. They said, no, thank you. And they struck the next day. When we asked the OPCW to go there, they said it is not safe. And that they don't need this in any case because the Brits and the French did have the samples. We asked the French and the Brits, can you explain how you got the samples from the place which seems to be not very safe? Then you have contacts with the white helmets who control the territory. And they said, this is a secret information. Look, we have much more facts to be clarified, and we have much more legitimate questions in response to the only one question which we hear from the Western leaders, from the Western media, the question being, why did you do this? Why did you use chemical weapons in Britain? Why do you cover Assad? And so on and so forth. And then, on the basis of this assertions, you say, if you are not right, will you punish us? It's a very interesting.
If you're Russia's chief diplomat, if Assad is deemed by the United States, Britain, France, and other countries to be using chemical weapons again, it is quite clear there will be a military response, and it will be a bigger one than we have just seen. What will that lead to? Will Russia retaliate?
Before you say again, you have to prove that he did use chemical weapons. Can I give you a brief?
I'm just asking you a simple question because the world wants to know.
No.
If the US, to quote Nikki Haley again, is locked and loaded, and if they deem, never mind what you think, if they deem Assad to again be using chemical weapons, it is clear they will come up with a military response bigger than the one we've just seen. What will the Russian response to that be?
You know, I am not in the guessing business. What I know is that when, some time ago, the three Western countries who are leading this crazy campaign said, if Assad uses chemical weapons, then we would use force. You know, I believe that was a signal to the bad guys, including white helmets, to stage a provocation. Now, after they struck on the 14th of April, they say again, if you do this again, we would use force again. This is another invitation to the opposition, to the extremists, to resume fighting, which they did already. They tried to attack Damascus immediately after the strike. But my point is that when people say Russia is responsible for the obligations of Assad under the Chemical Weapons Convention, it's a very outrageous statement. Everybody, we did it together with the United States.
A final question then on the diplomacy, then I want to move on to other matters. The US is pushing for a new UN security resolution today, which they believe is needed to send the international signal that Assad cannot be allowed to do this again. Will you work with the United States at the UN? Will you end vetoing every single resolution the US and its allies puts forward?
Not every single resolution. If you mean that they want to resume an investigating mechanism which is not transparent, which is not independent, and which takes decisions on a sentence itself without a verdict from the Security Council, then no, we cannot accept this.
You won't accept.
By the way, and if you know what I think. Please, 1 second, Stephen. I believe that the entire reason for this resolution is to make it look that if Russia and Syria agree to cooperate, which is impossible because of the substance, but what they want to do is to make it look that we and Syria were bombed into negotiations. That's why in that resolution they insist that Syrian government must not negotiate. They forget that the main opposition group, which they all support, the so-called Riyadh group, Nasser Hariri recently, the leader of this group, stated that the United States must continue to use force, not just in case of some chemical episodes, but against the Syrian government wherever and whenever the Syrian government opposes the opposition.
Some quick fire questions for you. First of them, do you believe that President Assad has won in this endless Syrian conflict?
It is not about winning. It is not about Assad or his opponents winning. It's about the Syrian people getting a break from this disastrous 8 years.
And what is Russia's end game? I see you're sending more military material and men into the Syria conflict. Is it your commitment now to back Assad all the way till he controls every inch of Syrian territory?
No, it's to protect the Syrian Arab Republic from aggression, which was launched on the 14th of April, and which the three countries say that they will continue.
Are you going to send this latest sophisticated S-300 anti-aircraft missile to President Assad in Syria? Because if you are, the Israelis are going to be gravely concerned.
President Putin addressed this issue, and he clearly reminded that a few years ago, at the request of our partners, we decided not to supply S-300s to Syria. Now that this outrageous act of aggression was undertaken by the US, France, and UK, we might think how to make sure that the Syrian state is protected.
To be clear, you're saying that what has happened in the last few days makes you reconsider and feel positive about sending those very sophisticated anti-aircraft missiles to Syria?
It makes us convinced that whatever is required to help the Syrian army to deter aggression, we would be ready to consider.
500,000 people at least killed in the 7 years of Syria war. 12 million people at least displaced. 5 million of them at least now living outside Syria. Do you seriously think that President Assad can ever unify his country, heal the wounds, be the ruler of Syria in any meaningful sense?
We never said this. What we did say, Resolution 2254, it is for the Syrians to decide the future of Syria. New constitution, elections, let the Syrians decide. And mind you that the ongoing efforts to split Syria is very much against what people say formally and publicly. And when you speak about disastrous effect of some civil wars, don't forget what shape Iraq is in, what shape Libya is in, and those who did it, they now want to have Syria joining the club.
I want to briefly turn to the case of Sergey and Yulia Skripal, who were poisoned in Salisbury in the south of England. In this interview, you've told me that credibility is important, that trust is important. You are the Russian foreign minister. You claim that the Skripal attack was mounted by British intelligence services who you, perhaps jokingly, I don't know, said are known for their license to kill. Do you expect that claim to be taken seriously?
Look, when we were told that there is no other credible explanation but to assume that it was Russia which highly likely poisoned Skripals, we said that there are other credible explanations.
Well, yours isn't credible.
Why? Why do you think so?
Have you got one shred of evidence to suggest British intelligence tried to kill Sergei Skripal?
Well, you know, there is an old Roman criteria, who is to benefit? And I believe the UK is grossly benefiting from the provocations, both in Syria and in the United Kingdom itself.
But hang on a minute,
and
Foreign
Britain
Minister.
is back on the stage of world politics
but Russia,
in a very negative, in a very aggressive, in a very weird way.
But
that's
there's
what
a deep
maybe
inconsistency in your position, if I may say so, Foreign Minister. In this interview, you've been at pains to tell me Russia is utterly committed to all of the international commitments and conventions on chemical weapons,
Absolutely.
including supporting the work of the Organization for the
Absolutely.
Prohibition of Chemical Weapons.
Absolutely.
You know better than I that the OPCW has run tests in 4 different labs on the nerve agent used in Salisbury. All of them have concluded that that was a Novichok agent in a highly pure form, as described by the British government.
And that's the problem. That's the problem. First, the A234 agent in highly pure form, in high concentration, is already raises suspicions. Because this...
It came from Russia. It's quite clear it came from the former Soviet Union. You invented that particular nerve agent.
Look, Stephen, you're not factual. You may be hard talking, but you're not listening. This chemical substance, indeed, was invented in the Soviet Union. Then one of the inventors fled to the United States and made the formula public. And if you want to check before raising the issue, please do so. The United States patented this formula. And it was formally taken by the United States Special Services of the Army, I don't remember. But 8234 is a very light, I mean, it acts it seriously damages a person, kills him or her. But it evaporates very fast. And the sample taken 2 weeks after the event cannot, according by our scientists, to contain very high concentration.
I guess it's all a question of credibility.
And
What you're telling me may be credible in Russia. It's certainly not credible around the world. You know, you've had more than 100 diplomats expelled from more than 20 countries. It's clear where the consensus lies. Russia is seen as culpable.
Okay, if you want to finish the issue of the substance, on Saturday we presented a paper which contains literally, the conclusion of the Swiss laboratory in the city of Spitz, which was one of the 4 laboratories, which did say that there was traces of A234 very high concentration, but they also said that there was...
You trust the OPCW or you don't. It's quite simple. It seems you're now saying you don't trust the OPCW.
For a Brit, you have very bad manners. The Swiss laboratory report also said that, and in the first place, they found BZ, which was, I think, invented in the United States in 1955 and was used by it was among the equipment of the US and UK Army. And we asked OPCW, whom we trust, whether this is true or not. That in addition to A234, there was also BZ discovered. And we are waiting a reply from OPCW, whom of course we trust, but we want trust and verify.
We're almost out of time. I have to ask you about sanctions before we finish. The US Treasury Secretary is due to announce another raft of sanctions against Russian companies and individuals who are deemed to have contacts with the Syrian military. There are already, over the past few weeks, new sanctions from the United States on a whole bunch of different companies of individuals which have hit the Russian stock market very badly. Russia's being squeezed.
Thank you for your sympathy, but don't worry, we will survive. And it's not
Market down 10%, ruble down against the dollar.
You've seen the times which was very troubling in the past when what's his name, George Soros undermined your stock market and dropped the pound sterling very lowly. But it's not just these threats to punish those who keep contacts with the Syrian government. It's a threat, which as we see, to punish the entire Russian people for making wrong choice during the elections. When they say that we would never target the Russian men and women, we would only target the oligarchs, the politicians, the military who disturb the world, they are lying. Because their desire, as I see, is to make thousands and dozens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of Russians disturbed. Those who have been employed.
But that is Russia's vulnerability. You may have an arsenal of nuclear weapons that President Putin boasts about, and in fact he says that they're the most potent and powerful in the world today. But you have an economy which is weak and vulnerable.
True, and we know this, But this economy has sustained quite a lot, beginning from World War II, and I can assure you that the government and the president are very much keen, to make sure that the necessary reforms are taken through. And this was the essence of the first half of the presidential message to the parliament. And his second part, when he informed his audience about the new weapons delivered in Russia, he ended by saying, we always are ready to talk, provided the talk is respectful and based on the looking for balance of interests.
And a final thought. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, said the other day, the Cold War is back with a vengeance, but also with a difference, because now the safeguards to manage the risk of escalation are no longer present. That is a truly frightening thought. You've been Foreign Minister for 13 years. Is this the most scary time that you have lived through?
The safeguards, one of the safeguards is having normal channels. The channels between us and UK have been closed by the British, with all agencies fighting against terrorism. Between the military, it was dropped long ago by the initiative of London. NATO-Russia Council, which was a very useful mechanism to promote confidence and transparency, was closed for all practical purposes by NATO, who only wants to discuss Ukraine in that body. And the European Union closed all the avenues of cooperation with Russia, except talking to us on Syria and on some other things.
But do you feel you're in a new Cold War?
Well, I think it's worse. Because during the Cold War there were channels of communication, and there was no obsession with Russophobia, which looks like genocide by sanctions.
You think the situation today is worse than the Cold War?
Yes, because of the lack of channels of communication, except very few.
That makes it very dangerous.
I hope not only you, but other compatriots of yours, including the government, recognize this.
And it's hard to imagine or remember a time when Russia looked more like a pariah, looked more isolated. You have the World Cup coming in the summer, which Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, in a rhetorical flourish, said could be compared by some to Hitler's staging of the 1936 Olympics in Berlin.
In 1938, the UK team was playing against Germany in 1938, when 1936 was already past us. And if you go to internet, you will see a photo picture before the beginning of the game, when both the German soccer players and the UK football players salute by the Hitler Nazi welcome.
What's your point?
I'm not going to discuss Boris Johnson. We had a chat recently when he was in Moscow. Let him get fun.
Sergey Lavrov, we're out of time, but I thank you very much